Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, I should say. Just a few minutes after that. Please keep eating. Don't stop eating. Just a few remarks. I'm Paul Pizzi, with the Christian Business Luncheon, and I'd like to welcome you all here today. Thanks for coming. And do we have any pastors in the house?
Kind of looks like one right here.
Les Carpenter, right? Yeah. First time. Very good. Welcome. Do we have any first-time visitors here? Awesome. Thank you. How about CBL board members? Can you raise your hand? And anybody has any questions, please see one of us, and we'll be happy to talk about the Christian Business Luncheon, or CBL as we call it. I want to thank our videographer, Jenna Rodriguez, who every month does a great job in videoing our speakers and our program. Thank you, Jenna. Of course, David Fry making us all fat since Fry's back here today. And today's sponsor is Tomball Ford. Is anybody from Tomball Ford here? I thought Tam Ross would make it, but anyway, we thank them for.
I bought a car from them. Does that count?
Okay, so our luncheons are the second Tuesday of every month, and except for the spring break month, we're here at Tomball College in the Beckendorf Center, and we don't charge for lunch. But we certainly appreciate your donations to help defray the cost. And there's a little bowl on the table if you feel led to put a donation in there. We certainly appreciate that. Also, we have sponsorships available, and sponsorships are for a month, and they're $150. So if you or you know somebody's interested, please let us know. We really appreciate that as well. We have some more exciting speakers coming up. I've mentioned that next June, the bear man will be here. The man who was attacked by a grizzly bear up in northern Canada. I shouldn't even be here today, but he'll be here in June. In August, Wade Hopkins, who heads the Galveston Houston Fellowship of Christian Athletes program, he'll be here to speak to us. And then, of course, our own Mattress Mac, Jim McIntyre, will be here in November for our veterans program. So we have some really great speakers coming up. And today we have one as well. Jenna Rodriguez is here with us, and I'm anxious to hear her story. I've talked to her a little bit on the phone and again this morning, but it's gonna be a great story. So she was 8, her parents divorced, and for the next 5 years, her mother's boyfriend brought her home a consistent dose of daily domestic violence, drug and alcohol addiction, and living on financial assistance. And so when she was 14, she left home and was homeless and lived on couches in a lot of different places. And in the next 20 years, she lived with more than her share of hardship. She had a victim mindset, financial struggles, and bullying she lived with. But her faith and brave self-determination never allowed her to stay down for very long. She went from being homeless to senior controller in the corporate world, but she wanted more, so she started as an entrepreneur, and her first business failed and left her $700,000 in debt. Can't even imagine, Can't even imagine that. So she filed for bankruptcy, of course, and since then she's been a successful entrepreneur. She's now a business and brave strategist with her company Brave Masters. She's generated over $1.5 million in earnings over the last 5 years, and she helps entrepreneurs worldwide to scale their passion-focused businesses, overcome their fears, and unpack the natural gifts to live out their greatest potential. She's been happily married for the last 18 years. She has 2 awesome kids, and she and her family attend Second Baptist in Katy. And she's going to share with us how she gets her brave on, trusts in God, follows her truth, and lives by the motto, #gutandfaith. So I'm happy to present Jenna Rodriguez.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I was going to say good morning. It's not morning anymore, so good afternoon. I really am blessed and grateful to be here with you guys and such a beautiful crowd. And I've gone around and met many of you, and so thank you for the warm welcome. And I made you guys something specifically for this day, and it's this T-shirt. So I'm not taking my clothes off, but it's hashtag gut and faith, right? And it's very telling for what my story has been. And this hashtag came to me in actually just a couple months ago because it's really what transpired. And so I have a question, first and foremost. Let me make sure I'm in the safe room. Anybody ever have a breakdown? Raise your hand. Please raise your hand, right? Yeah, breakdown. And hopefully on the other side of that breakdown, you've had a breakthrough, yes? Yes, awesome. And so have I. And I want to share with you a little bit about that. Clearly, Paul gave you the cliff notes of my life, and I'll dive a little deeper into that. And I really want to put this story, this conversation that I'm going to have with you into a container that I call the attachment detachment. I'm even going to write a book about it. And it really came to me that so much of the suffering and the strife and the uncomfortableness and the things that we put ourselves through is because we're attached. We're attached and we're edging God out with our ego. That's what EGO stands for, according to Wayne Dyer. Because we're not listening to him, we're attached to our own agendas. We're attached to our requirements. We're attached to our stories, and we're living in our story instead of standing upon them. And so when those words came to me from God above, and I was journaling about that, the attachment detachment process came to me as well. So I'm going to share with you in the form of my story and just what really occurred. And how some of these lessons have really shown up for me. Does that work for you? Okay, great. So I want to just start with what occurred as far as a breakdown, because I had a very recent one. And then we can go back to all the other ones if you'd like. But the most recent one happened on November 27th of just last year. And last year actually was a pretty tough year for me emotionally, internally, spiritually. And I could feel it, I could see it happening. I was running my business and I was changing things up in my business. I have a teenager and that hormonal part started. And just things were really, coming at me a lot, right? So it wasn't so much like the world was falling apart externally. I've had that, right? This was internal. And November 27th, I woke up and I was uncontrollably crying. I was in the shower crying. I got dressed. I'm still crying. I had to get on a coaching call with my clients. I'm still crying, and they're like, "Are you okay?" And I told them yes, and I would be. But I didn't understand what was happening other than I knew what was happening, meaning something was changing, something was shifting, something had to be heard and understood for me to break through. And so even most of last year, I call it my jackhammer year, because I was changing things up and I was, really trying to figure things out, and I was pressing through and all of that. But what I found out is that's not how you do it. It's not what God wants us to do either. And so I just fell to the floor. I reached out. Lesson number one, don't try to do this alone. And so I reached out to someone that is a mentor of mine and could help me through this emotional moment and got underneath some of the things that were happening for me. At the moment I said to me. Everything happens for us, by the way. And I realized that my entire life, up to this moment, up to that day, had been about control, had been about attachment, had been about survival, right? And not trusting in God. I thought I was, but I was fooling myself. I wasn't really. I had moments, I had inspirations, there was times where I could feel him there, I heard the voices, and my inspired voices were happening, and then I'd follow those steps with gut and faith, right? And but that day became really crystal clear that I didn't know what I was doing. And so from that moment, I not only cried all the way through it, sometimes that's the only way to release everything you're going through, in my world anyway, and I surrendered. That was the answer. But let me just tell you how difficult that was. Has anybody ever felt the difficulty of surrendering? Like literally letting go of everything you know, everything you believe, everything you think is so, everything you are trying to make happen, and make the money, make the business work, make the job work, make everybody show up to the volunteer, right? Like control was like so blatantly my problem that day I literally surrendered like I'd never surrendered before. I didn't know what it was going to be like. I was very scared, and I found myself in what I consider a free fall. So has anybody ever jumped out of an airplane? Only me? I know, I'm crazy, right? Just a little. Okay, I'm the only one. All right, so 20 years ago, in my craziness, my fearlessness, I jumped out of an airplane. And so that day, sitting in my office, sitting in my house, I felt the same thing. I felt the fear of sitting on the edge of the airplane, and the tandem, the guy hooked to me, was saying, cross your arms. And this is the edge of the airplane, 10,000 feet up. And he's like, cross your arms. I'm going to shove us out, right? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Right? So my arms, I can't move the mic, but you get the picture. I'm like one hand on either side, and he's like, no, you got to cross both arms. And November 27th, I was like, wait a minute. If you cross your arms and you jump, the tandem's God. He's got your back. He's like, I got you, but you got to cross your arms. And you got to let go, and you got to surrender. And I mean, I tell you, I actually wrote a poem. I wish I could remember it. I'll have to find it one day. Jump, I say, fly, fly away was the name. That's all I got. But it was absolutely godly. Like the experience, I literally felt him with me as I jumped out of that airplane. And the same thing happened November 27th. I felt the rush of exhilaration. I felt this fear. I felt the excitement. I felt the holy cow, what am I doing? I'm crazy to do this, and let go. And that's the day that I found gut and faith. That's the day, listen and follow. That's what that means. That's the power of it. And if you can remember, he's got your parachute, right? Then everything else is taken care of. And for the next month, I got really quiet. And I mean quiet. I had to quiet the ego, the mind, the chatter. Anybody else? Right? Wendy and we were just talking about that. Right? The chatter that's going on in our brain all day long, 350,000 thoughts a day or something. And I don't know who counted. Right? But I saw myself trying so hard, attachment, to hold on to those thoughts, to hold on to the certainty, to mitigate the risk, to keep myself comfortable, to keep myself safe. And for about a month, December, last year, just a few months ago, I got quiet. I got quiet off social media. I got quiet, and I started to hear his voice. And I call it my inspired voice versus my shallow voice, which is ego versus, right, our God and source. And I really started to live in this space of wonder and peace and surrender. That was my goal. I was like, I don't want anything to disrupt this because I've got to figure myself out. And so the way I got quiet, even more so, is I started meditating. Anybody meditate? Yes, thank you. Okay, I'm not alone. Yeah, well, and I told myself for years, I'm like, this would be a good idea. I should meditate every day. I should also exercise. Yeah, that happens. And and so happy I did, because for every single day, up until Christmas, we went out of town, so I didn't stay on my routine, and I noticed the difference 3 days later when I wasn't getting quiet. And so since Christmas, 99%, I've woken up every morning and went to my chair and got quiet and all by myself, right? Before the kids and the husband wake up and the dog wants to eat, right? And it's magical when you can hear the voice that you're supposed to be listening to. And so I say all this because this is clearly not what most of my life has been like up until just a few months ago. And yes, my life truly started out with turbulence, with hardship. And, when my parents divorced at 8, it was absolutely crushing. I remember sitting on the edge of the curb, right, with my father sitting there, side by side, and he's trying to explain what he's doing and why he's leaving. And I'm 8. That makes no sense to me. Why are you leaving, right? And so I made up a lot of things about that moment. I made up that he didn't care. I made up that I don't matter. I made up that, I'm not good enough. And we make up a lot about our circumstances. I don't believe our circumstances make us make anything up. I think we choose. That's my take. Because then, in spite of that, I actually have a choice to change it. And so my whole life has been about discovering what I need to do to change it, right? And so a lot of that came from control, however, right? Trying to control things, trying to make it different, trying to, force it, instead of following with gut and faith and detaching from my attachments. And so from that moment, within a year, my mother met another guy. And she certainly didn't feel confident. She, I would say, settled. But the moment I met that man, even at 9 years old, I can remember the day I met him. I had a gut instinct that this wasn't going to be good. There was something not right. But I'm 9. What am I supposed to say? I think I told her I didn't like him, but she's not going to listen to me. And so she brought him in. He was an alcoholic from morning till night. Marijuana all day long, abusive all day long. I lived in fear. I would come home and I'd be like, what's going to happen next? And the only thing I can say right now is I'm extremely grateful to God that he never laid a hand on me, but he certainly emotionally wounded. I was a whore. I was no good. He called me all those names. And I'm 12. And so for 5 years, we moved probably at least 10 times because we would get evicted or we would get trying to get away from him, and then she would take him back. And, and it was just so chaotic. It was so unbelievably stressful. So I only did the thing I knew to do, which was to retreat and to be, it's really about, what can I control? So I controlled my grades. I controlled my effort at school. So I was a straight A student, and I had to be, because there was nothing else happening for me. I had to be a straight A student. I had to get it right. I had to get something right. And so for 5 years, I lived this, and to be frank with you, I watched, him rape her in the other room. What am I supposed to do? I'm 10, I'm 12, I'm little. I don't know what to do. And so this pain of watching not only my mother suffer, but also watching her not leave, right? And that duality of stay and codependency and, not able to get out. And all of these things were just confusing. And the only thing I could do was control my tiny little world in my mind and certainly at school at the time. But spring break at 14 years old came along, and I actually had visited some friends, and she knew what was happening at home. And I was just hanging out with her and her nieces and nephews, and it's like 7 days, right, of spring break. So each day, my emotions got worse and worse, and I was like, I don't want to go home. I don't want to go, it kept getting closer to the day I had to go back. And she looked at me and she goes, I'm 14, she goes, and I'm still in junior high. And she goes, look, I know what you're dealing with. I will drive you to school if you want to stay here for the next 2 months or a couple months or whatever. She was a savior, right, Brenda? I was like, are you kidding me? Like, really? Like an angel, right? Just shows up and you know, gut and faith. Like, I had the gut instinct, holy cow, I can't go home, and I don't know what the answer is. But I kept praying and waiting, and she became that answer. And now what's next is the hardest conversation I ever made. How do you call your mother and say, I don't want to come home? And I have a friend here that's willing to take care of me. And I consider it the one I remember, one of the bravest first moments of my life, was for me to be able to call her and say, I don't want to come home, and I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I can't. I just can't do it anymore. 5 years, it's enough. And so I moved out. And if anything inspired her in the moment, she did not react negatively. I was shocked. She actually said, I understand, and I think it's a good idea. And so sometimes God speaks through mom too. And in that moment, I got relief, like, wow, right? But I certainly didn't know where the heck I was going from there. And the short story is, a couple months later, I was able to move back with my father, and he lived here in Spring, which is where I grew up originally. And he took me in, so I got to start freshman high school. Anybody know Westfield High School? Right? Still alive. And there was some turbulence there too. I didn't really get along with my stepmom. She didn't really care for children. Married a man with two. So there was some hardships, and of course I had come from an experience they don't even comprehend, and they hadn't been around. My dad and stepmom had no clue what I had been going through for 5 years. I mean, they had a clue, but not emotionally how to deal with it. And so I had to, again, stay attached to my surroundings that I could control. And what can I make happen? What can I do about the situation? I never wanted to be victim, although I remember the thoughts. Why is this happening to me? That's a clue that we're being victim. And so when I finally got to, 1 year later, I made another decision. My mother had actually gotten away from the man and moved to Ohio, of all places. And so I had another decision. I don't want to stay here anymore. I think it became a theme. And so I called her, and I wanted to be with my mom again. We were close. That bond was still there. And sure enough, I moved to Ohio and moved to a town. Let me just put it in perspective. I had 3,500 people in the high school, right? We got big high schools here. Yeah, the whole town had 2,000 people. So I think there was 40 people in the class. Like a room like this was my class. And so I was a little culture shocked, to say the least. We had one stop sign, right? One stop light. But it was where my great-grandmother grew up. I mean, I had 100 years worth of family history in this small town in Ohio. And my mother had moved in with my uncle that had polio, and he was in a wheelchair. And so it was a good time for her to help take care of him, and he obviously took us in and gave us a place to live. And so what came from that was the next challenge. I was the smart girl with straight A's, 4.5 grade point average, because why? That's the only thing I could control. And I was the pretty one. I was single. A lot of guys like that idea. But I showed up in this high school, and at first everybody was like, oh my gosh, the new shiny object. I want to get to know the new shiny object, right? I'm the new girl. Everybody's grown up there. Anybody from small towns, do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So it's, I was like, okay, this is their culture, right? I'm coming in, I am the outsider. And so I of course, I made friends. Within 6 months, everything changed. Jealousy, hate, bitch on my locker, scraped into my locker. And I was like, now what? What did I do? What is happening, right? And it was, again, this emotional process of what am I supposed to do with this? So the bullying was unbelievable. The teachers even started hating on me because I came in and took over valedictorian. not hard. There was 40 people, and I was like from a big school in Texas that gave me weighted GPAs, right? So fast forward, end of sophomore year, I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. Like, this is crazy. I can't change them. I can only like respond. How am I going to get my brave on this time? Well, now I had this opportunity, another breadcrumb laid in my feet. I think it was the first in the country, but it was a program where I could go to college full-time and get high school and college credit. I know we have this now. And I said, sign me up. I was like, get me out of here one more time. And that's what I did. I started college at 16. And it really was a safe place. I got along with the kids. They were older, they were more mature, stuff happened, but as far as, they're college kids, but they weren't hating on me all the time. And so, all of this to say that I went from, one turbulent thing to the next, but all in the midst of it going, how do I change it? How do I change it? What do I do about it? Instead of like wallowing in it, right? And yet it still was my nature to control. And God was in there, but he's probably, I think happens in a lot of our lives. He's sitting back on the recliner with his arms crossed going, I'm just waiting. Just waiting. I'm quietly waiting until you can calm down enough for you to hear me, right? Instead, my ego is like, talking to me all day long, and the emotions are high and all of that. And so the message inside of that is the surrender is necessary to stay sane and to connect to what he's actually trying to show you. And another lesson, I wrote them down. Oh yeah, so I mentioned the shallow voice versus the inspired voice. So this was the other thing that I started seeing a very common theme, was that I was so clear that I was listening to the shallow voice, the ego wanting to tell me what to do and tell me what if, fear and what if this happens, and and part of me would be like, just jump, right? Jump out of the airplane. Because at this point, anything's better than what I'm dealing with. And so fast forward, I found myself finally kind of getting my footing, and I moved to Houston. I was like, I don't want to live in Ohio anymore, to be honest, guys. I hate winter. So it was too cold. And I finally moved back in 1999 to Houston. And it was the best thing I ever did. And sometimes you just got to have gut and faith, listen and follow, and do the next thing. Do what's next, because he's guiding you to what's possible if you pay attention. And where the brave really came for me, and why I've named my company Brave Masters, is because I saw 4 years ago, not only is entrepreneurship brave, right? And I can tell you more about that in a moment. But I saw that I don't ever really take the easy way, I take the brave way. And that means, and despite the uncomfortableness, despite the hardship, despite the, nerves of getting on a stage, whatever it is, I'm gonna do it anyway because I'm brave, and I'm gonna face myself. And one of the hardest things, I was just talking to Wendy earlier, is like I started journaling, but that page was really, really blank at the beginning. And it's like, what do I put on here? What do I write? And I remember just this year when I started journaling and getting quiet and meditating and like, can I hear you, right? Listen to God and come through me. I had to journal it because it was coming to me so fast, and all of the ahas and all of the details of like what I should do and what to consider, but I wasn't capturing it. It was just fleeting thoughts, right? And so I started writing it down. And I saw things about myself that was really hard. And I think the bravest thing you can ever do, and what Brave Mastery is all about, is facing yourself. Is looking in the mirror, taking ownership of your life, taking ownership of all the hardships and stories and things that we've gone through, and realize they're all for us. And if we can stand on a stage or share with our children or be honest in our lives about what we've learned and who we are because of it, not who we are, despite it, right? It's like, it's the ultimate in being brave, is to face oneself. And so when I had that blank piece of paper, I got emotional at times because I had to face myself. It is the mirror that we all need to look in in order to expand to the next level, in order to have everything we want. When we deny the truth of who we are and what we really want, I knew what I wanted at 9 years old, and it wasn't to be with that man. I just didn't have a voice. I knew at 14 it wasn't going to work. I couldn't do it anymore. I spoke up. I knew when the kids started bullying that it's like, I got to get out of here. I got to have a different voice about this. I got to do something that's going to further my future. Trust me, I had drugs and alcohol. I could have gone down a very different road, like many do. It actually repelled me. I didn't want anything to do with it. I was afraid of it. And so when we start to face ourselves and we follow the gut and faith, right? That's when the magic shows up. That's when we can hear what we're meant to do next. And God speaks through us. Because anything else that we hear, the what ifs, the shoulds, the past projecting, or the future tripping, as I call it, right? Anything else is not real. Only now is the real. This moment with you guys, this is the only real moment. Anything 10 minutes before and 10 minutes in the future isn't real yet. Right? We live so much in the past and so much in the future that we don't even know what the real is. And so when I started getting more present and started being more in the now, He can move through me. I did not plan this talk. I don't know what I'm saying. He does. And hopefully it's serving someone, just one of you in this room today. And so I always talk about in my business, and Paul said it eloquently, my first one failed with a massive $700,000 in debt and bankruptcy. But I had another brave choice then as well. What do I do about that? And I got up and kept moving and stayed in entrepreneurship. And now I get to help clients really understand who they are, what they're capable of, how to move into their potential, and then I can help them with the numbers and the marketing and the data, right? But if we don't face ourselves, that's what brave is all about. We can't make anything happen towards our dreams. And so much of what I do now is about helping individuals find their potential. Like, what is it that you truly desire? And sometimes it's an ugly truth. It may mean risking relationships. It may mean divorcing relationships. It may mean, and I mean emotionally. So, for instance, I had a partnership I was in on the side with two other best friends, and I also heard God speak through my journal, my words I was writing, and I was like, wow, I'm not meant to do that anymore. Trust me, I was highly emotional for a couple weeks because I had to communicate it. It took me straight back to when I had to tell my mother I wasn't coming home. I was reliving that experience of having to admit my truth. But it's been the most powerful thing I've done in the last few months, is to be honest and to show up and to find your voice. And so I help people speak up. I help people tell their stories. I help people build their businesses. Yes, why do I love entrepreneurship? Because it's filled with potential. And if you're not a business owner, that's great, that's fine. But it's also a place of what are you doing in your life and how are you living into your potential in your life and whatever you choose, whatever your talent is. How are you leading your family? How are you leading your community? Are you being all of you? Because that's all we really want to see, is every ounce of you. And I'll just tell you this, 6 years ago, I would never have done this. I wasn't speaking. I was terrified. And then I said yes to myself, and I said, I've got to speak. I got to figure this out, right? And I have to get out there and start having a voice again. Somebody needs to hear it. And I don't know who, and I don't know when, but the moment you get the calling, like follow with gut and faith and step into it, lean into it, and trust me, He has supported me all the way through. Every conversation, I even was driving here a little nervous, right? Who isn't? Because I want to do well for you, right? But I even heard myself, He's never let me down before. Every stage I've gotten on, every event I've ever held, right? And so it's an opportunity for you to look inward and go, what do you need to get honest about? What do you, in order to actually get to where you want to go? I think that's the challenge for all of us. Because when we're truthful, I don't really want to do that anymore. It's not my thing. Or it is my thing and I need to lean into it and take the risk. Either way, he's got our back. And so I just leave you with this thought that if anything in this conversation has inspired you to be brave, to take a look at something that you're avoiding, something that you're attached to, right? The attachment-detachment process is all about surrender. It's all about serving instead of trying to get everything. That's control. That's ego. You guys are servants, I know that. And it's all about being able to really inspire others and be for them, right? In your families, in your communities, etc. Even in your businesses, if that's what you do. Serve people. And so take a moment and just look into your own world and decide, am I speaking up or am I sitting down? Am I trusting? Or am I still have doubts and fears and paying attention to the ego? Or are you listening to the inspired voice and taking the next step? And in that next step, I'm with you. You're not alone. And certainly, you have someone right next to you that can probably relate. So thank you for the opportunity to be here and to share this. And please let me know if anything has ever shifted for you in this conversation, because I'd love to know. Thank you. Yes, please. Any questions or, yes, sir.
Please explain your relationship with your parents in a second right now.
The second part of my life.
No, the second question is,
Oh, second, okay.
have you forgiven your abuser? And how did you go about that process?
Yeah, very great questions. So my father passed away 6.5 years ago, 2012. And I'll tell you this, it was a beautiful process, meaning he struggled with a brain tumor for 7 years. And our relationship was turbulent too. He was very distant emotionally, and he didn't know how to help me a lot of times. And yet he was probably the one I was the closest to. Just there was a connection with him. I'd say it's probably because when I was born, I was for the fight of my life from the day I was born, premature and life flighted from my mother, taken away from my mom for 3 weeks, and put in an incubator because I wasn't sure I was going to live. And he was the one sitting outside the box, right? So I can only imagine that's probably where my connection with him. I still feel him very much even now. The magic, though, is I was very angry at him most of my life until the last probably 5-6 years, especially when he got brain tumor. I was like, what am I doing, right? So I got to forgive him. I let go of all that before he passed. So that's a positive relationship now, right? He certainly talks to me too. And my mom and I are actually pretty close. We have had ups and downs. She lives very fear-based at times, so I hopefully can be an inspiration to the opposite of that. And she's a very strong woman, and so she lives in Austin, so she's close by. My brother as well. I have an older brother that lives there. Hopefully you can pray for him. He struggles with prescription addiction due to back injuries and back pain. So. But we're very close, and so I continue. I look at me first. What am I holding on to? What am I not detaching from? What am I making things mean? About my history with them or current situations. And I do my best to just be in a space of forgiveness. And I think we have to forgive ourselves for not knowing to be forgiven or being forgiving. And so for me to forgive, and I have forgiven the abuser. A mentor of mine said, if we can just forgive people for not being wiser and more aware at the moment they did what they did, right? Like, would you do the things you did 20 years ago today? Probably not, right? So who we are at any given real moment, right, is just who we are in that moment. So yes, I definitely have gone through a forgiveness process inside and for myself, and just allow, right? Just surrender to, God will take care of them, in a good way. Hopefully, I haven't spoken to the man, since I was 14, so I don't know if he's still around or not. But it has been a lifelong process of me letting go of control and letting go of the need to make it, okay and all these things, but be willing to feel the emotions, be willing to own the things I made up about it, right? And I think our power comes from not being victim, but being victorious. And in victorious, you have to own your life. You have to own what happened for you and find the lesson, find the gift, and inside of that, I'm able to forgive because now I see why. And now I can stand here and because of it. So yeah, definitely. Thank you for asking.
Sure.
Yes, ma'am.
Question. How do you distinguish between that instinct, that gut that God gave you when you were 9 about this is not a person I need to be around,
Yes.
I want to, versus having that control mitigating risk?
Yes.
Some of that mitigating risk in life is legitimate. And
Sure.
some of it is not. You're talking about the shouldas and wouldas and all that. So
Right.
how do you determine the difference in those moments?
Yeah, awesome question. I love talking about this, actually. It's certainly a level of practice for me and a practice of living more consciously aware and self-aware. And I have, in the last few months even, honestly, I've reached a whole new level of that because I've gotten quiet enough to discern between the two voices. And I think for me, I'm starting to notice even more so that the gut feeling, the quiet voice, the inspired voice that's talking to us, God speaking through us, it's a whisper a lot of times. Now, we know the 2x4s come every so often, but when you can feel it in your body, it's visceral. It's there. And yet we deny it, shove it, ignore it, move away, right? Because it's like, what is that? I don't know what that is. I don't know what that feeling is. And so for me, I've been more in the gut and faith. Trust it, feel it. Okay, this is happening. And even when I had to make the decision about the partnership, I felt it. It was a no, I'm not meant to do this. And then I had to deal with all the ego, the chatter, and the oh my God, I have to tell them. Oh my gosh, what if I lose my do you see all the what ifs? So what if I lose the relationships? What if they don't love me anymore? All this stuff just poured on top of it within seconds. And sometimes that's how fast it happens. You feel the answer, you feel the truth, and then within seconds, the ego comes in and starts to play the game. Let's stay out of here. Let's get out of this neighborhood. And so I just started to hear the words that my ego says, right? That chatter, that survivor in us. And it's the what ifs and the shoulds and the and sometimes, yes, if I'm meant to get out of the way of a bus coming, yeah, thank you. I'll listen to it, right? But so much of our ego doesn't discern between pain, emotional or physical pain. It's just trying to keep you away from pain. And so for me, if I can really get quiet enough and ask questions, I think it's also about asking better questions. What's going on for me right now? So when you feel the reactions or you feel the chatter start and you're going crazy because you can't figure it out or the confusion sets in, then I actually pause and go, what's going on? What's really going on here? And sometimes the answer is not immediate. Sometimes I need to go back to my journal. Sometimes I got to go meditate or get quiet or just get out of my daily routine, the busyness and the craziness and all of that. Because I also believe the ego will keep us crazy busy to also avoid it. Avoid the answer, the truth. And so that's been one of the biggest things for me lately, especially, is stop denying my truth. Do what I'm meant to do, because then greatness can actually occur. So does that help and answer? Yeah, great. Good question, thank you. Yes?
Hi, Jenna. The simplest always awesome forgotten here. So in January, Mary Rose spoke in she had gone through 3 abortions,
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of things. And then last month, we had Jenna Rodriguez, similar to you, a lot of domestic abuse, a lot of sexual abuse, all kinds of things. And you and your story today, and all 3 of you are happily married. And so, you know, it takes a special relationship to go there. So how do you trust a guy after all the abuse, and how does he enter this, and how does he fit in here and trust the other way? So can you talk about that at all?
Oh yeah, that's good. I have looked at it, but I've never spoken to that. So, I mean, truthfully, in the first, in my 20s, I mean, as far as like relationships, I was very hypersensitive to anything that looked like abuse. Like, I had a radar on, like going around. And so, to be honest, my very first boyfriend at 15, and he was a little bit older, but and then we went out on a date or something, and he was of drinking age, so he was drinking, but then I saw the kind of like a violent tendency, and he got jealous really quick, and I was like, I'm out. I'm out. And so I built a kind of a radar for it, and I think the key to all of it and having healthy relationships is ownership of your own stuff, self-awareness, doing the work, and all of that I've been speaking of. You have to be the best you in order to be able to manage someone else's stuff, right? And I'll be truthful also, it has not been easy. We actually almost divorced in 2013. And went to a church, got some help, and then really just saw that our egos were, we all have egos. Yes, we all agree? Well, I had this visual like a couple weeks ago, and I'm like, they're double dutching. Have you ever, like crazy double dutching? Everybody like jumping rope, the ego, back and forth. That's what we're doing with each other, right? And certainly in our relationships, we're ego dancing, right? And so when our egos are dancing, we're constantly trying to batter the ball back and forth and mitigate risk and, protect ourselves and I'm right, no, I'm right, all that. And so, and we had that. We've had to grow up, and I met him when I was like 26 and he's 6 years older. And he brought with him a 3-year-old. I had to, fell in love with her immediately, but I became mom immediately. And I had the ex-wife, and so there was so many dynamics to the relationship. But I did build a strong personality. You can probably tell I'm a pretty strong person. But I at times it was my armor also. And so in the last 10 years or something, I've let the armor down so that I could even be this vulnerable with people. You would have never caught me up here telling you all this. No way. Look at all that I have to risk, right? So in the relationship, you have to be willing to risk. You have to be willing to be honest. You have to be willing to own your stuff. And so now our arguments are short. And usually within minutes, I can see my stuff going on, and I can walk into the room and go, well, that wasn't cool, so I apologize. Learn to apologize. Learn to own what's going on internally, because then that helps, obviously. And truthfully, we've had a rocky road, certainly with the ups and downs in the business, the money not being there. We've had some challenges with our oldest daughter at times, and just helping her through things. And it's just, honestly, I look at this last anniversary and I'm like, how'd that happen? 18, we're 17 years married in December, 18 years together. And we got married in 11 months. I don't necessarily recommend it, but we did, and it's still here, and I don't know. I had a gut instinct, and I followed, right? Even back then when I didn't even know that really was going on for me. So I think those are the keys for me of making an 18-year relationship work. And the moments where we really were ready to quit, there was this, our children's faces would pop into both of our heads. That was pretty scary. And then we looked at there's no deal breakers here. There's no infidelity, there's no drugs, there's no abuse, all these things I've dealt with. There's no, none of that's going on. What are we really quitting on? And when I would ask myself that, and it's just like, I just wanted to be right. That's all that was happening. My ego was pissed off. So I was just mad. It's like, why do we end a relationship because of that? And so I think so much divorce, and I've been a child of one, I've seen it clearly over and over, and if you can come to a decision about relationship and from a peaceful gut and faith place, certainly if there's abuse or something like that, I don't believe you're supposed to stay. But I think if you can come from a place of like, have I done everything I can to own my stuff and to be apologetic and to forgive and do all that work, then look inward at the relationship and go, now what do we have? And we always have a foundation of love and growth, and we're wanting to grow ourselves individually, and that's what we're doing. So it's like, when that's the foundation, and we love our children and we want the best for each other, and like there's more good than not, then you choose every day to stay in my world. So yeah, great question. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you so much, guys.